Hello, hello. This is Dr. Z. Zachary Brooks back with my series on culture, cognition, and change. And if you followed along so far, you know that this is part of a series of presentations I did in Mexico at la Universidad Popular Autónoma del Estado de Puebla, also known as UPAEP, in Puebla, Mexico, in October 2018. The presentations went very well. But at the time, I was asked if I could re-record them because the recording that I made at the time, while good, wasn't really good enough to listen along and learn some things from. So I'm re-recording the presentations I did during that week. So right now I'm on presentation officially 5 of 6. So I did an intro and a presentation on intercultural competence the first day. The second day, I did something on brain and language. The third day, I did on bilingual decision making, but I did it in Spanish, la toma de decisiones bilingüe. And this is the fourth presentation I did. And this is called cross-cultural decision making. Now, this is kind of a hybrid of various things, this particular presentation. I've been asked to do presentations before on bilingual decision making, but I've changed the title to cultural decision making because it fits the theme of the conference or the theme of the people who've invited me. But cross-cultural decision making actually has various traditions, and so when I was asked to present on it, I couldn't quite repeat the bilingual decision making presentation I did. So I did a few things. I kind of just repurposed some of the research I've done already for a different presentation, which is typical enough, and I kind of looked around and found a few other things that I could use. So if there's any cross-cultural decision-making experts out there listening, please email me and say, hey, great, but you forgot, these 25 things, or, whatever feedback you have, it's fine. I'm always, the only real pride I have is just getting better. So if there's just something that could be better in this and you want to share that, then great. So anyway, with that, I will go ahead and get to the next slides, and we can get going right into cross-cultural decision-making. Culture, Cognition, and Change, that was the title of the conference, the week-long event, of which I was the lead person. And now we're going to go to the next slide. This first slide always takes a second because of the music. Yeah, there's the music, and we're off. The 3 C's, this is Dr. Z, that's me. This is part 1 of 2, and this is cross-cultural decision-making. So imagine you are a person who speaks Spanish as your first language. Mexico is your home country, and you say, yo hablo el español. And imagine you're an American person like I am who speaks English as a first language, and you say, I speak English. But then when you suddenly cross over as a native English speaker to Spanish, you're maybe a little bit less clear, less certain about yourself speaking a second language. So, yo hablo el español. With some uncertainty, you're not certain if you do, or if you're a second language speaker of English, you might kind of wonder, I speak English? And that, simple sort of framing is going to outline what we'll talk about today in this cross-cultural decision-making. So there's the component I've studied in bilingual decision-making, very much looking at how words influence decisions, but, anyone who comes across this will say, well, yeah, but what about culture? Everyone always asks about the cultural effect of decision-making, and that's extremely important as well. So what is cultural decision-making, or what is cross-cultural decision-making? Well, it's you standing at a point, wondering in a new situation what decisions, what actions, what gestures may be appropriate in this new situation. So it is the study of how people from various cultures interact in decision-making situations, communication, negotiation, and business. And it looks like should be various cultures interact in decision-making situations, communication, negotiation, and business. And so think about your own life, and maybe you haven't traveled, or maybe you have, but many places in this world, I'm talking about the United States where I live at the moment, there's lots of cities where there's lots of opportunities to interact with people from different places. And let's say everyone speaks English at a very high level, there's still cultural things that arise in those situations. And think about your own country. Certainly there's diversity in your own country among cultures. So I'm going to talk about just three experiments that have been done that kind of illuminate, hopefully illuminate some aspects of cultural and cross-cultural decision-making that you can see it through an example how cross-cultural decision can play out. So the first one is called a public goods game. And if you want to read more, Wikipedia is a pretty good place to start. There's lots of information out there. All these games, public goods game, prisoner's dilemma, ultimatum game, have been used by behavioral economists, psychologists, lots of other people to study various things. And I'll talk about them in a second. So if you want to find more information, there's tons. And the reason I used them for my dissertation is because they had been used a lot. And I thought, well, I could simply compare the information that first language speakers provided me versus the information that second language speakers provided me. So the public goods game. So the public goods game was developed by a person named Samuelson in 1954, and it's an experimental economics game. And here are the basic sort of rules. So participants are given money or credits or something, money, credits, whatever you want to call it, or so money in quotations, fake money, to start the game. And participants often in these games are college students, and that makes sense if you're a college professor doing research, because the people who are closest to you are going to be college students, 18 to 25-year-olds generally, who oftentimes for class credit or maybe a little bit of money, or just because they want to, will show up for 15, 20 minutes, an hour, and participate in something. So when we talk about participants, we're usually talking about college age, at least what was traditionally college age, 18, 20, 25. These days, people are studying at all ages. They can then keep their money, or they can give some of the money to a common fund. And so putting money towards a public goods has the potential to provide strong return on investment. However, it means an immediate loss to the participants. So put yourself in this situation. You're given some money or fake money or credits, and you can either keep that for the next round of the game, or you can contribute a little bit of your money for the next round of the games with an uncertain return. So down below it says putting money towards the public goods has the potential. So you don't know if you're going to get money back or if you're going to increase your money at all. So what's the most rational decision? That's really critical here. What's the most rational decision here? Well, if participants decide to contribute, they incur an immediate loss that may not be returned. Okay? The common fund contributions are multiplied, so when common funds are distributed back to the individuals, the choice to contribute toward the group can lead to more total funds than before the contribution. So this is a nice thing to know. You're going to lose money immediately, but you can gain more money later. Okay? Then you can think, what's rational? Keep all my money, or put a little bit in, or do a little bit of both. The next point here is each player faces the temptation to defect and to free ride on the other player's contribution, since each invested dollar yields only a return of 50 cents to the investor, right? So that's the sort of a third option already. You can keep all your money, you can contribute some of it, or you can hope that everyone but you contributes, and then you benefit from their goodwill while you keep all your money. So that might be a very rational decision. So the rational and dominating solution is to invest nothing and benefit from others. But all players make more money when all participants contribute money to the common good. So what are your choices in this situation? Well, let's look at how this is played out in different times. So I presented this in Mexico, and 200 pesos is about $10, I think, right now. Is that correct? Let me see. 1 to 20. Yeah, I think it's about $10. So you're given 200 pesos. And you can keep your 200 pesos, or you can give 50, 100, 150, or 200 pesos to the group. So you have an option to give percentages of that money you were given to the group. Money to the group is doubled, then divided evenly to the group. So let's see how that would play out. What do you do? So round one, everyone is given 200. Everyone is given 200 to start with. But let's say in this scenario, all of those 4 participants give half of that 200 to the group. So the round 2, that's 400 in total. That's doubled to 800 pesos. Now we're getting actually some $40 range, which is pretty nice. If you're not don't have any money walking into a experimental room one day and suddenly you're given $40, like, hey, this is not bad. And then that money, that 800, is now redistributed on top of the 100 you kept. Now you've come out ahead in just a few rounds, and these rounds can just be a minute each. So you can think about time-wise, you've actually done very well quickly simply by contributing more. But what's the most rational choice? Well, the most rational choice is just to hold on to your own money, and hope others contribute. But then when you withhold, then the contribution levels are less, since you will receive less in return. So the most rational choice as a group is to everyone contribute. But that's not usually what people do, and that makes a lot of sense. Why would you give up some money now for an uncertain future? And that's what this experiment, and along with other experiments, do. They really ask people hard choices. Do you want some sort of satisfaction now, or do you want possible satisfaction later? And those are very legitimate choices either way. So one particular group of researchers, a guy named Urbich, I think he's in Holland, he wanted to look at the public goods game and free rider behavior. And remember, the free rider behavior is when you don't contribute and you just you free ride along what other people are contributing, and you get a little bit of their money and their goodwill. And he wanted to know how people speak in their first or second language, or using their first and second language, would do in this case. So contribute or not, and so we have contributors on part of the slide, and we have free riders, and what are the benefits and contribution, etc. So do you contribute or not? Well, as I said, he's in Holland, this Urbich and his fellow colleagues, and they had 2 groups of people they looked at. They had conditional contributors and unconditional contributors. So when people were using Dutch, in both cases, they gave more than people when these students were using English. So these are bilingual speakers of English and Dutch. And conditional and unconditional. The unconditional means they were just not told any particular information. Conditional meant they were given a particular information about what would happen, which is really fascinating. So when you're given a little bit more information, you think everyone would have a very similar giving pattern, but in this case they don't, which is really fascinating. So this is a nice little interesting sort of insight into people's giving behavior using their first or second language. I repeated this experiment in my dissertation. I haven't published this, so this hasn't gone through all these statistical analyses, which is important, but as far as talking about it and getting people interested in this topic, I think it's just fine. So my results, I had 108 first language speakers and 160 second language speakers. And in my game, second language speakers contributed more, not less, in a public goods game. So this is not quite the same as the first experiment, where people were simply using their first or second language. This was slightly different because they were using one of 2 languages. My experiment had people who came from various language backgrounds. So though I found that second language speakers contributed more, not less, in this public goods game, the Chinese speakers actually contributed to the discrepancy. So they were much more likely to give than people with different language backgrounds, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, you name it, all of these other languages. So it's not clear that my results change the fundamental principle that people give more in Dutch than they do in English, or more in their first language than their second language. But it's interesting that, once again, sometimes in these results, you can get different things by just small population differences in this case, or small word differences, as we've seen previously. Okay, so let's move on from that game and move on to the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma. And this is also a game that's been used lots and lots in the past. And this one's a lot of fun sort of for parties, I think, because you can kind of to get people to think about what would it be like to be a prisoner, but more importantly, what would it be like to have certain restrictions placed on you? And when you have certain restrictions, then what kind of choices do you make? And that's what all of these games are sort of getting at, is like you have to play within the rules of a game, and once given the rules of the game, what choices do you make? So before I go on to the prisoner's dilemma, self-promotion, I'm writing a book called The 6 A's, A Practical Philosophy for Living with Meaning and Purpose. So tune back in the next months as I publish more of that book, The 6 A's, A Practical Philosophy for Living with Meaning and Purpose. So the prisoner's dilemma. So prisoner's dilemma game was developed by some gentlemen, Flood, Drescher, and Tucker in the 1950s. So here's the setup. There's two criminals, and they are arrested, and then they are separated. They're buddies. And the two criminals are interviewed after separated separately, which makes sense. You want to make sure that each of them gives their side of the story without the influence of the other. That makes sense. Each criminal by the police is offered, or prosecutor, depending on your jurisdiction, a prosecutor or a police person offers each criminal a deal. And the deal is pretty basic. Betray your friend by saying your friend, not you, committed the crime. So what is your, again, we're talking about rational decision. So the rational decision probably is not to cooperate. Reason why is because you don't want to betray your friend, correct? So what's rational in this situation? What's rational? If we go back to, I think it was the last presentation I did on bilingual decision making, I introduced the concepts of prescriptive versus descriptive decision making. So prescriptive is when we try to analyze the best possible decision, hence rational. But we all know that we don't always make rational decisions. Think about someone you dated and you know that's not always rational. So now we're talking about the rational decision is to not cooperate, but we're not always rational. Sometimes we're very irrational, and sometimes we're guided by emotions. What do you do in this situation? So now the same scenario in cartoon forms. Here's you, and here is your friend. You guys are great buddies, the best of friends. You would never, ever, ever betray one another. The two of you take money from a bank. Hey, that's pretty cool. So you guys can now have a lot of fun with your new fortune. That's pretty cool, right? Well, yes, but your other friend, let's call your other friend a policeman or a policewoman, he or she has different ideas. She takes you and your friend away. Wow, okay. So your other friend isn't quite what you thought your friend would be. Now here's the scenario. You can either betray your friend or you can cooperate. You have two choices: betray your friend or cooperate. Just like in the first thing, the public goods game, you can either give money or keep it. There's only two choices. Both of the choices have lots of seeming benefits, but there's also disadvantages to each choice. In this case, the choices are the following. If you and your friend each betray each other, each of you will serve 2 years in prison. But if you betray your friend and your friend remains silent, you will be set free, and the other prisoner will serve 3 years in prison. Wow. So, man, if you get lucky and you betray your friend and your friend doesn't betray you, you leave. You leave immediately. And your friend, unfortunately, has to serve 3 years in prison. Number 3 is the same thing as number 2. In this case, though, your friend betrays you, you remain silent, you sit in prison for 3 years, your friend goes free. So number 2 and 3 are basically the same scenario flipped. Number 4, if you and your friend, if the other prisoner, both remain silent, both of you will only serve 1 year in prison. Okay, so what's the best possible choice? And would that choice be different for people who speak multiple languages or have different cultural backgrounds? So another group of researchers, Ackermans, Hatzing, and Van Wittel-Lustien, I think that might be close to the correct pronunciation, since of Dutch people in 2010, they did the prisoner's dilemma as well, and they asked the basic question: cooperate and betray your friend, cooperate or betray. So betray your friend or not betray your friend. And again, you can see, it's kind of hard to see here probably, you have different choices. Both stay silent and you serve 1 year, or you betray your friend stays silent, he serves 3 years, you go home free, or if you both betray each other, you both serve 2 years. So which is your choice? Now, once again, these researchers in Holland were looking at Dutch and English, particularly using either Dutch or English. And what they found is that if someone has lived in a country, an Anglophone country, that means a country where English is the primary language, England, Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, those countries. If a Dutch person had lived in an Anglophone country, it negatively affected their cooperative behavior. If they played the game in English, it also negatively affected the cooperative behavior. And if they were living and playing the game in English, so if they lived a long, long time in the United States or Canada or England or somewhere else, it increases your betrayal behavior. So, what they found is that there's a lot of things that can happen once you're exposed to a new language, in this case, English, which is kind of, fascinating. So there's an English component, just learning the grammar and the sounds, but there's a cultural component, and that kind of shows up in this experiment where things change once you play the game in English or have been exposed to an English culture, an Anglophone culture, even though you're now back in your own home country, either using your first language or your second language. So pretty fascinating stuff. So my results were that first language speakers were more likely to cooperate than second language speakers. Okay, you can see the numbers of people I had up above. So let's go on to the next game, which is called the ultimatum game. And this one is maybe my favorite because it sort of teases out, I think, that ideas and principles and intuitions that we have that are just under the surface. And the second I introduce the ultimatum game, you'll kind of feel something very clearly, I think, because these experiments are very well designed by very smart people. And the second you hear them, you think, you have some intuition. So that thing that's sitting right below the surface of your consciousness, it suddenly pops up and is activated. So before doing that, I will self-promote myself a little bit more. I am writing podcasts now on bilingual decision-making. So in addition to this series, I'm doing, currently I have 9 podcasts I've uploaded on bilingual decision-making. So if you like this, there's other things you can find at dr-z.net, which is right here. So this is the end of part 1 on cultural decision-making or cross-cultural decision-making. So far, we've covered the public goods game and the prisoner's dilemma. And the next slide, in the next presentation, we'll talk about the ultimatum game. So hope you come back. In the meantime, happy deciding.